to come out of here feeling that we're all together in this, rejuvenated. And yes, we had an election season that was very long, and we were all sucked into it. And whether or not you're happy about the president-elect, we have to get back to work. We have to join forces, and we have to stop these wars of aggression. And this is the best way we know how to do it, is to bring people together. Because personally, for me, when I see all of you out there, it gives me a lot of strength when I get those 3 a.m. phone calls from Iraq. And my son tells me his stories, which I really don't want to hear at 3 a.m., but I don't want to hear them ever again. I want him to come home and stay home, just like the rest of the military that's there, and even our contractors, as Jeremy Scahill knows. Anyway, I'd like to introduce our first speaker, Scott Ritter. Scott has traveled many times to the Middle East as a weapons inspector for the United Nations. He took what he knew to be true about weapons and mass destruction in Iraq and came to public attention in 2003 when he argued strenuously and convincingly that the Bush regime's case for the invasion of Iraq was based on lies. Since then, he has published several books, including Target Iran, The Truth About the White House Plans for Regime Change. World Can't Wait is very grateful to Scott for his work and for speaking with us tonight.
It's good to speak out on issues like this. I think it's sort of a symbol of patriotism. As a former Marine myself, yesterday was the 233rd birthday of the United States Marine Corps. Today is Veterans Day, a day in which we honor our veterans. I'd like to start this way, just to put everything into perspective, especially on today, Veterans Day. The United States military acknowledges that 22% of the soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marine who come back from Afghanistan and Iraq suffer from a variant of PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. Others will put the number up as high as 63%. The New York Times and other newspapers have ran a story in which a U.S. Army Major General, New York National Guardsman, has gone public with his struggle with PTSD and how he's praised by the Pentagon and higher-ups for having the courage to come out and speak about the difficulties he's faced in Iraq. And the hopes are that by doing so, he will set an example for the other soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines who are undergoing similar difficulties, so that they won't hide behind a bottle or violence or drugs or just disappear off the face of the earth, that they'll come forward and say, I need help. And it's a touching story, and it's a touching concept that, yes, indeed, America now recognizes that its warriors that we send off overseas to do things in our name come home shattered, come home somehow not the same. It's touching that we've recognized this. But then Tyler Boudreau brought it all back from the perspective of a Marine Corps company commander. Whether it's 22% or 63%, it's irrelevant. Because as a Marine Corps Rifle Company commander, what do? The first Marine that comes in says, sir, I got a problem. I can't sleep at night. That stuff that happened out in Iraq, it's in my head. I can't get rid of it. He said, you can hug that Marine. You can send that Marine to the chaplain. You can send that Marine off. But then the second Marine comes in, and the third Marine, and the fourth Marine. Do you honestly believe that the Marine Corps is going to allow you to keep 22% of your combat effective fighting force back because they can't handle it? Or 63%? Do you think America's really going to say, no, all you guys and gals that are suffering, you don't need to go back? It's lip service, ladies and gentlemen. It's lip service. We say we support our troops, but we don't support our troops. We support the concept of our troops, but when you put a human face on our troops, the bottom line is we collectively turn our backs on them again and again and again. And I'm going to give you a number. It ain't 22%. And it's not 63%. It's 100%. If you go off and you participate in combat operations overseas, you will never be the same person. And we as a society have to understand that. Because today we're here to talk about unjust wars and wars that should never be fought. And ideally, humankind should have evolved to the point where we aren't needed to sink down to the animalistic levels that war represents. And yes, I say that. War is the worst thing that mankind can do to mankind, because it's not about doing good, it's not about honor, it's about death and destruction, and that's it. But I'm a realist. I love dogs. I have a couple myself. I think they're wonderful, cute little creatures. I hit them with a rolled up wad of paper every once in a while when they leave me little gifts on the floor in the morning. But generally speaking, I feed them, I pet them, I walk them, and I think they're great. I wouldn't want to ever do harm to a dog. But if a rabid dog comes wandering through my streets in my town, I kill him. And I do believe that in the world we live in today, there are rabid humans. And sometimes these rabid humans come together and they form rabid groups, and they're going to have to be dealt with. And they're going to have to be dealt with by the armed services, perhaps of the United States of America. So we should never forget that if the time comes that we have to send our troops off to fight in a war that we deem to be a tragic necessity, that no matter how justified the conflict may be, it is not a time for national celebration. The moment our Commander-in-Chief gives the order for American soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines to go off and engage in combat should be a day of mourning, because those people will never be the same. And we have a duty and responsibility, especially on this day, Veterans Day, to recognize that. We owe it to them, and we owe it to ourselves. Now, having said that, let's talk about some conflicts that we are currently in, or conflicts we may be getting ourselves involved in. I mean, ding dong, the witch is dead. The people have spoken. Yes, we can. Change will come. And it's a wonderful thing. George Bush, in 70 some odd days, is leaving the White House. And I couldn't be happier. But is this really going to change things? If we close our eyes and tap the ruby slippers 3 times and say, there's no place like home, will we be magically transported off to the wonderful, wonderful hinterland of America, Kansas? Yes, Toto, we are in Kansas again. It's not going to change anything, ladies and gentlemen, unless we force the change. Yes, we have a president-elect who claims that he wants new policies, who claims he wants to do things in a different way. But let's talk about the reality. Iraq. As we speak, there's an ongoing dispute between the United States of America and the government of Iraq over a status of forces agreement. Now, I respect you in this audience here, and I know you guys are plugged in. We're right now in a city of, 12+ million people? If you walked around and asked the average man or woman on the street, hey, what's going on with the SOFA agreement in Iraq? They go, what? SOFA? Is it like a king-size sofa? But they wouldn't even know what you're talking about. And yet the reality is, if we don't get a status of forces agreement signed in ink by the end of December, all those wonderful American troops we have over there are in deep trouble. Not that they're not in trouble already, but they're in deeper trouble, because all legitimacy of this illegitimate conflict goes right out the window. Now, either they're going to be compelled to sign a status of forces agreement that will be rejected by the Iraqi parliament, and that seems to be the direction that we're heading, or we will hold our guns and there won't be a status of forces agreement, and then we have to turn to the United Nations for an extension of the UN mandate, which means we've gone behind the backs of the Iraqi people. So even if the international community blesses us with holy water, to the Iraqi people it will continue to be nothing but an illegitimate occupation. Now, all of this is going to unfold before our new Messiah even steps foot in the White House. He's going to inherit this mess no matter what. On January 20th, Barack Obama will have a disaster in his hands in Iraq. A disaster that he had nothing to do with, but now he must resolve. Now, he has talked about getting the troops out of Iraq. But I will tell you this, that this president in the first 100 days of his administration, will not be seeking to get our troops out of Iraq. He will be seeking to stabilize the situation in Iraq, because the situation will devolve violently. And rather than having troops come home, we may find ourselves sending more troops into Iraq, reinforcing an already desperate situation. What do we do about this? How do we handle this? We have a problem here in America, you see, because we do have a moral conscience. It's not always perfectly in operation, but we are a moral people. We believe in good as opposed to evil. And so we somehow feel a moral obligation when we have broken something as egregiously as we have broken Iraq, that we must somehow fix it. You've heard Colin Powell speak of this. It's the Pottery Barn rule. You know that one. You broke it, you own it. That may work at Christmas, ladies and gentlemen, wandering through Pottery Barn as you are wont to do, searching for the ideal gift, and boom, bam, oh man, I broke the vase. I'm sorry. Here, let me pay for it. I now owned it all as well. But you can't apply that to a situation like Iraq, because I will tell you this. Barack Obama is as ignorant about the reality of Iraq as George W. Bush was. Therefore, Barack Obama is not in any position to fix the problem. You cannot solve a problem that you have not properly defined. And as a result, with this moralistic argument that we have broke it, therefore we must fix it, all that happens is that we stay in Iraq and we continue to break things. Rather than call it the Pottery Barn rule, why don't we use the following analogy? We'll call Iraq a china shop. And we got a bull in the china shop. And the bull is thrashing around, breaking the china. Now, the moral thing to do would be to pick up the broken china and buy new china. But how many times are we going to restock the china shop? At some point in time, does it not make more sense to get the bull out of the china shop? But void of any political pressure, Barack Obama will have a hard time making that decision. He instead will be under pressure not to be defeated, you see, and to bring the bull out of the china shop is to concede defeat. And Barack Obama does not have the pedigree that allows himself to be exposed in such a manner politically. It's going to be a very, very difficult problem, ladies and gentlemen, that's going to require not just pressure on the executive, but frankly speaking, it's high time we start lighting a fire under the feet of the legislative branch to get Congress involved in bringing our troops home. Because without the assistance of Congress, this president will not be able to act decisively on Iraq. But Iraq isn't even the biggest of our problems. Some people might say, what could be bigger than Iraq? I'll give you one. Erase the Q, insert the N, and say Iran. Repeat after me 6 times. Iran, 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 Iran. It's a huge problem, ladies and gentlemen. Now, we can all breathe a sigh of relief because, again, she's gone. The house done fell on her. She's going away. And we'd say, wow, it's all over. But no, there's that other sister out there. And that other sister, again, isn't the president, so to speak, but it's the pressure put on the president not to be seen as being weak. Now, some people say that the rhetoric put forward by Barack Obama in the lead-up to the campaign was all inspired by the campaign itself. That's fine and dandy, except that he gave a press conference as president-elect after the election. So it gives us some insight into what this man is thinking about Iran. And what did he say about Iran? He said the following. He said that Iran's continued pursuit of nuclear weapons is a problem. Iran is a great threat to the world. He said that Iran's ongoing support of terrorist organizations is unacceptable, and that Iran must change. Frankly speaking, if you erased Barack Obama and put George W. Bush in, you'd have the ideal neoconservative speech, because that's exactly the message that they've been sending over and over again. Now, we have a couple problems here, because this is a Harvard-educated man that actually got good grades. Harvard education doesn't mean much anymore, thanks to the current president, but Barack Obama can breathe fresh life into a Ivy League education. This is a thinking man. He's smart. He knows what he's talking about, except when he says that Iran is pursuing nuclear weapons? What evidence does he have? I find it disturbing that Barack Obama would dare articulate in public a conclusion that is more faith-based than fact-based. The bottom line is that there is no evidence that Iran is pursuing a nuclear weapons program, and it's irresponsible of the president-elect to say so, because what it does is box us into a corner when it comes to how we can pursue future relations with Iran. Now, he says that Iran's support of terrorist organizations is unacceptable, and he lists Hezbollah and Hamas as two. He also talked about Iran's ongoing support of the Muqtada al-Sadr and the Mahdi army inside Iraq, a terrorist organization. Now, this is the man, correct me if I'm wrong, who said, I'm willing to sit down and talk with these people, that I will do so without precondition, that negotiation is the way forward, and yet America does not negotiate with terrorists, and Barack Obama's definition has made it impossible for him politically to head down the path of negotiation. Hezbollah, have they carried out terrorist acts? Yes. Are they a terrorist organization? No, that's far too simple. It's not that easy. Hezbollah is the legitimate democratic expression of a significant population in southern Lebanon. Shia Muslims who say these are the people who represent us. Hamas, a terrorist organization, yes, if you focus on a narrow slice, but they are also a democratic organization that participates in the legitimate democratic processes of Palestine. And to sit there and call them terrorists is not only wrong, it's irresponsible, but it's incorrect. And it's not conducive to the kind of thoughtful diplomacy that this president claims he wants to engage in. We have a problem, ladies and gentlemen, because Barack Obama has defined Iran as a problem in the exact same manner that the Bush administration has. If you define something as a nail, the only solution, therefore, becomes the hammer. And there's a danger here because Barack Obama does not have the pedigree to stand up to the military when push comes to shove on a decision about the use of military force. If people articulate along the lines already defined by the president that Iran is a threat, it's not inconceivable that rather than negotiating with Iran in the coming years, Barack Obama could find himself in a situation where he might be ordering military strikes against Iran. But you know, that's not even the worst problem out there. There's one more out there that makes all these pale in comparison. Barack Obama, rather than recognizing the absurdity of our ongoing situation in Afghanistan, has said that he is going to surge 30 to 40,000 American troops into that country and that we will continue cross-border operations into Pakistan for the purpose of hunting down and killing Osama bin Laden as the primary mission. Now, A, it's not doing the Afghan people any bit of good, but B, it will only take a situation that's already horrific in nature and make it worse. We will not get Osama bin Laden. We will only exacerbate the situation. We will empower not only the Taliban, but the radical elements of the Taliban linked to al-Qaeda, an organization we're supposed to be seeking out to destroy. Instead, we empower and serve as the recruiting base for them. We become the recruiting poster. And we do so not only in Afghanistan, but more critically in Pakistan, where we are violating a sovereign nation's territory on a daily basis, slaughtering not guilty terrorists alone, but innocent civilians. People need to understand in this day and age of war, modern war, 90 to 95% of the people who die in conflict are innocent civilians. And when we take the conflict over the border into Pakistan, we are killing innocent civilians. Wedding parties, school children, people going about their daily business. Is this the process of stopping terrorists, or is it the process of recruiting terrorists? And Barack Obama hasn't just said he's going to continue that policy, he's going to expand that policy in a manner which very well may destabilize the government of Pakistan in this critical time. And if you destabilize the government of Pakistan, there's a good chance that jihadist Islamic fundamentalists will take control. And Pakistan is not a nation theoretically pursuing nuclear weapons, ladies and gentlemen. It is a nation that possesses 60 to 80 thermonuclear weapons and the material for 200 more. We have a huge problem out there, ladies and gentlemen, and this problem manifests itself on day one of the Barack Obama presidency. Yes, we can. We can aspire to greater things. Yes, we can, and we have. We have shown that America is mature enough to elect an African American as its president. But are we mature enough to reflect on the policies our country is engaged in and on how we, the United States of America, interact with the rest of the world. 300 million people still feel that we have an inherent right to dictate the terms of coexistence, the 6.8 billion others, and until that calculus changes, ladies and gentlemen, nothing will change. Is Barack Obama the kind of leader that can help bring about that change? I don't know. The jury's still out. Thank you very much. It was a pleasure talking with you.
Okay, we're back in business, I guess. We realize the threat still exists. I want to introduce tonight Larry Everest, who's our next speaker. Larry has also been to Iraq after the Gulf War and written extensively about the Middle East for Revolution newspaper and other publications over 30 years. His most recent piece in 3 parts is The U.S. in Afghanistan, A War for Empire, Not a Good War Gone Bad. Larry was the convener of the Bush Crimes Commission to investigate the Bush administration for crimes against humanity in 2006, and he's been a supporter of World Can't Wait from our beginning in 2005. Let's welcome Larry Everest.
Well, this mic is just right, Scott. Thank you. And Elaine, thanks. So I guess this is the week of euphoria and hope. And I do have to say that just the thought of not seeing Bush's crotch first, arms out swagger, and that who cares about a million dead Iraqis smirk on his face night after night, I like that. And not having to watch the Palin-McCain racist, hate, fascist roadshow that's been touring around, at least for a moment. They're not gone. I can understand why people are happy about that. And of course, who doesn't want an end to these wars? Who doesn't want an end to torture? Who doesn't hope that the deep racism and national oppression that's been an integral part of the fabric of this country since its foundation isn't somehow going to go away? And most of all, I can understand why people want hope for change. Deep change, radical change, fundamental change, because the world, as we're discussing tonight, certainly needs it. Hope for that kind of change is precious if it's based on reality. If you love someone, you're not going to buoy their false hopes if a quack tells them to take 2 aspirins and call them in the morning and their cancer will be cured. You wouldn't do that because you know it's much, much more serious and takes a much deeper look at reality to deal with that horrific disease. Well, that's the situation we're in today. Tonight we've got to wrestle with some deep realities in a truly horrific situation across the world, as Scott has been pointing out. So what kind of hope is Obama offering? What kind of change is he offering? Is he going to stop the wars? What's his campaign all about, and what kind of hope do we actually need? You know, one of the things I have to say that really bothered me about the celebrations was the night before on November 3rd, Monday, November 3rd, there was a little village in Afghanistan, northern Afghanistan, that was preparing a celebration of its own, a wedding celebration. That night, their celebration was disrupted by U.S. bombs that killed at least 37 civilians, mostly women and children. Fathers holding their children's battered remains, blood-stained shrouds and veils and clothing scattered about, houses reduced to rubble. This has been going on every day. Again, Scott alluded to this. 15 missile strikes in Pakistan since September alone. Today, another 14 people killed on the roads of Afghanistan because U.S. forces didn't know who they were. It turned out they were working with the Afghan government. And you know what bothered me is that nobody at those celebrations was denouncing this, was saying this is intolerable, this is unacceptable, whether they voted for Obama or not. This isn't cause for celebration. And I was thinking about, well, why was this the case? Why didn't you see outrage around this, denunciations? And who's ever heard anyone at these rallies, maybe save World Can't Wait and a few dedicated fighters against the war, who's raised that Afghanistan is an unjust war? You see, part of the problem is Obama has sold people, or far too many people, on the notion that Afghanistan was the good war. It's the good war because supposedly it was simply a response to September 11th, simply about catching Osama bin Laden, simply about protecting America, and Obama's promising, like Bush, to, quote, keep America safe, and using that as a blank check. And a blank check for what? Afghanistan was never simply a response to September 11th. Afghanistan, from the moment it was conceived in the aftermath of September 11th, was part of a regional and global war for empire. It was conceived at the moment that the invasion of Iraq was conceived. It was simply phase one. It was conceived when Bush, Cheney, Rumsfeld, and the rest of the gang were talking about overthrowing 7 governments, including, yes, Iran, in 5 years. This was a war whose aim was to solidify U.S. hegemony in the Middle East, to defeat Islamic fundamentalists, not because the rulers of this country had a problem with reactionary Islamic fundamentalism, and it is, in my view, reactionary. I was in Iran when the Islamic Republic was founded. It's a nightmare. But that wasn't the problem that the rulers of this country had. The problem they had was that this political force was impeding their plans in this region. It was impeding and posing a problem to their control of this region, which they considered more vital than ever. It was threatening the quote-unquote security of their aircraft carrier in the Middle East called Israel. So part of the goal of this war was to defeat these forces, overthrow governments not under U.S. control, gain a deeper grip on this region, and quote-unquote drain the swamp, radically transform the conditions that gave rise to this force that they were in opposition to, and integrate this whole region more closely into the U.S. empire. And if you just think about this concept of drain the swamp for a second, what does that imply? That implied not just killing a few mosquitoes, but raising an entire area where tens of millions of people live. Is it any wonder people are being slaughtered in Afghanistan and Pakistan, and 1 million have been slaughtered in Iraq or died as a result of the war? So this goal of seizing control of this region was part of a bigger plan for unchallenged and unchallengeable empire. This is something I go into in my book. We write about in Revolution newspaper, where my writing appears. Control oil, control this region geographically, put military bases here, surround Russia and China, prevent them from rising. And I do have to say there's a good scene in the movie with Mr. Dick Cheney in the movie W that spells this out, the hidden truth about this war. So there's nothing good about this. There's nothing good about this so-called war on terror. It's a war for greater empire that's employed massive amounts of terror, whether in the form of torture, whether in the form of cruise missile strikes, whether in the form of bombing, whether in the form of midnight raids, kicking down doors, killing innocent civilians. And the fact that Obama is embracing this war and claiming he's going to go on to win it means that he's following in Bush's footsteps, whatever tactical differences they have. And it was interesting listening to Scott, because he's indeed right that they're in a big mess over there, and everything they do threatens to make that mess worse. And again, this for them isn't a question of a mess for the people of the region. This is a question of a mess for U.S. imperialism and its ability to control things there. But they're compelled to pursue this war, which is why, it's sort of interesting. Everybody's saying, well, let's give Obama a chance. Well, we've given him a week, and what has he done already? He appointed Rahm Emanuel, a hardcore Zionist who made sure anti-war candidates couldn't even run in 2006. He's likely going to have Robert Gates as defense secretary, who's Bush's defense secretary, and who recently gave a speech calling basically a refinement of Bush's preemptive war doctrine, including around nuclear weapons, and laid out a scenario of a very dangerous world, and that the United States had to, maintain this sort of permanent war footing to deal with. The first press conference he had, he targeted Iran for supposedly, as Scott was referencing, for supposedly having nuclear weapons and supporting terrorism. And really, people are talking about the fact, the analysts in the know are talking about, well, why? I mean, didn't people just vote to have these wars ended? Well, the reason why is because these wars flow out of a system. They're not Bush's, some sort of, personal peak of George W. Bush. These wars flow out of a system of capitalism and imperialism that demands global exploitation, control, resources, markets, and so on. And, this was brought home to me today. I was in the front page of the New York Times. I don't know if people saw this. But there was a story about a town in Pakistan called Losam. And the article said to save Losam, the army, and they're talking about the Pakistani army, had to destroy it. And I'm sure most of us remember that from Vietnam, and it got me thinking about the fact that I was politicized in the 1960s against the Vietnam War. And I was trying to think of all the different wars I've protested since then. El Salvador, Nicaragua, Mozambique, Angola, either with direct or indirect U.S. involvement. There was an Iran-Iraq war that killed nearly 1 million people. There were the threats of nuclear war over Iran. There was a whole period of the Cold War in which the world could have been obliterated. Then we come to the Iran. I'm sure I'm forgetting many of them. The U.S. used force over 70 times since World War II. Then there was the first Gulf War in 1991. Now we're in the second war. And I was thinking about Obama's acceptance speech. All things are possible in the United States. Well, apparently eliminating wars of aggression and imperialism are not possible, because these things keep happening again and again and again. And I'll tell you what, I'm sick of this. If I live another 20 or 40 or how many years, I don't want to be here giving a speech to people about the fact that we're engaged in another war. I want to end this. I want to get to the roots of this. I want to change this world so these kinds of criminal things don't happen anymore. And I'm going to get to how we're going to do that. And these empires, I won't go on about this, but the empires go through different periods of time where they confront different necessities. And we're in one such period following the collapse of the Soviet Union, and was a time when the United States felt that it had finally achieved the status as the world's premier superpower without an imperial rival, and I consider the Soviet Union at that point an imperialist state. And it had greatly impeded what they were trying to do around the world. So they felt they had an unprecedented opportunity to create an unchallenged and unchallengeable empire. And you know the cast of characters, Libby, Wolfowitz, Cheney, Rumsfeld. They documented all this during the 1990s. They worked out this theory. When Bush got in power, they seized on September 11th to implement it. They saw it as an opportunity. They saw it as a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. And they also felt that if they didn't do this, they would go the way of other empires. I mean, the Russian Empire has fallen twice in the 20th century. The British, the French, the Ottoman Empire, and so on. And there were new challenges facing them. People can read Raymond Lotta's recent series in Revolution on the changes going on in the world. So this is something they considered foundational to the very survival of this system, which is why they've pursued this war with Democratic Party support, let us not forget. I read in The Onion that Barack Obama's greatest achievement was not being in the Senate when they voted on the Iraq War resolution. But he voted for every single appropriations after that. So this is something they understand perfectly well, is in the interests of the system, and I'm not arguing that there aren't very sharp differences and debates. They're in a mess. They're trying to figure out how to get out of it. But I think you can see one of the things I think we have to look at is what just happened in this election, because a lot of people are probably saying to themselves, well, you know, why did this happen? Didn't we just vote to stop a war? Well, you voted to stop a war in 2006 by electing the Democrats to both houses of Congress. What happened? You voted for change now, and who are you getting? The same people that have been in there. Why is that the case? Well, let's start from the economic system that's a foundation of society. That's the ground floor, the terrain, if you will, that these people all operate. And the purpose of elections is not to let the people decide. Elections are controlled by this ruling class. What did they spend? $1 billion? I don't happen to have that much money myself. Maybe some of you did. Brainwashing people. Elections are for the purpose of building legitimacy for the system and for the actions the rulers take after. Elections are not where decisions are made. And there's a couple of really good examples of this. First of all, there was an interesting article in the New York Times about a week ago that spelled out how right now, as the election's going on, the think tanks are talking about Iran right now, and including the possible need for military action. This wasn't, I mean, the candidates said a few words about this, but this wasn't a focal point of debate. This is already going on. And here's the other interesting thing. Even people like the Washington Post and so on are arguing that, look, the things Obama's proposing have already been implemented by Bush. The surge in Afghanistan. Bush is calling for 8,000 more, trying to maneuver in a more sophisticated way on the diplomatic front with Iran, drawing down in Iraq. This is a consensus in the ruling class that these steps need to be taken. It has nothing to do with this election whatsoever. But these elections can do a lot of harm. They can do a lot of harm by raising illusions and training people to think of the interests of the empire and of this particular country first, rather than the interests of the planet as a whole. You know, people think, getting behind Obama, that's a freebie. But let me remind you of something. Colin Powell, he was a breakthrough too, wasn't he? He was the first black chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. He was the first black Secretary of State. Now look, obviously we don't want to go back to a racially segregated society, but having a few people become members of the ruling class to serve the same system that enforces national oppression and racism on a daily basis is not a big victory for humanity. And think about this. Could Dick Cheney have gone before the UN in February 2003 and given a speech about how dangerous Iraq was and had anyone listen to it? Could Don Rumsfeld? Could Bush? Could any of them? No, but Colin Powell did. Colin Powell did, and he's somebody that Obama upholds. What does that tell you right there? Launching an unprovoked war of aggression that's led to 1 million Iraqi deaths, 5 million driven from their homes. And here's another example of how these elections work, and this is one that just gets me. During the campaign, Hillary Clinton threatened to obliterate Iran, threatened to obliterate a country of 70 million people. Why didn't all these people who are supposedly against war denounce this? Why wasn't this denounced as actually, a criminal statement, a genocidal statement? It wasn't because people get caught up in the logic of anybody but Bush and will do anything to get Bush out. Well, will you do anything, including doing what Bush does? That's just intolerable and criminal. And there was an editorial, a statement in our paper this week in Revolution, The Promise of Change and the Change We Need. It's a statement from the Revolutionary Communist Party. And it made a point that I just think is so important. Stop thinking about like Americans. Start thinking about humanity. I go back to the people in the village in Afghanistan killed. I go back to the suffering that is the daily situation of so many people around the world as a result of the operation of this system. And there was an article in the San Francisco Chronicle about a week ago about a kid named Ali Reza Khan. He's 6 years old. He lives in Lahore, Pakistan. He's a refugee from Afghanistan. He spends 6 to 8 hours a day walking through hospital waste, rotten food, and broken glass in a garbage dump in order to get food and make $1.25 a day. And guess what? That's better than the choices he has in Afghanistan because of what the U.S. has done to that country and the Soviets before them and the U.S. Fueling that war as well. This isn't, and Ali Reza Khan isn't an exception. Ali Reza Khan, there are nearly 250 million children around the world that work like this. In Afghanistan, Ali Reza Khan makes $1.24 a day. People in Afghanistan make $271 a year on average, less than $1 a day. This is the great liberation that's been brought by U.S. imperialism to Afghanistan. It's a nightmare, and it should burn in our minds every single day when we hear all this talk about how just this war is and how important this war is to win and how this is the greatest country on earth and all the rest of it. And we should dig into how it is responsible for these kind of suffering. So we've got to start thinking about what humanity needs. And when Obama gets up and talks about the promise of America and talks about the American moment and all the rest of it, he's arguing that people shouldn't worry about the Ali Reza Khans of the world, but they should worry about what happens in this country, to the people of this country. And of course, the rulers of this country aren't worried about that either, whether it be their soldiers or the masses of people that we see in this housing meltdown and the growing poverty across this country. And I do think that the soldiers who are being damaged by all this have to confront this reality as well, that they're serving an empire and it's unjust. And we need to support those who refuse to go along with this and who speak out against this, as was so powerful in Vietnam. But regardless, this is a military controlled by the system. That's what it is. So am I saying that there's no hope of any kind? No, I'm not saying that. The world's shaking. What seemed impossible yesterday is possible or happening tomorrow. But again, to go back where I began, we need hope on a real foundation. A foundation of how the system actually works, as I've tried to sketch briefly tonight. A foundation of understanding that we don't live in the 1500s. Humanity knows how to feed the hungry. We have the technology and the understanding to cure most sicknesses. We know how to build homes and house homeless people. And I want to give just two tiny examples. There's over $1 trillion spent on narcotics in the military globally. It's probably more than that. The U.S. spent $1 trillion by itself on the military. According to one UN document, and this, I'm just giving people a flavor of this. My point isn't that these transformations would come by giving people aid. $40 billion, according to this UN estimate, would give everybody on the planet water and sanitation, reproductive health for women, basic health, and nutrition. Less than 1% of what the world spent every year on weapons could put every child in school. But what is it going to take to, quote-unquote, reorder priorities? It's going to take a revolution that totally overthrows this dog-eat-dog, predatory, vampire-ish capitalist system that we live under. And our hope comes from understanding and learning the lessons of places where people did try to do that and did do that and actually accomplish great things, and I'm speaking of Russia and China. And our hope comes from people like Bob Avakian, who's the head of the Revolutionary Communist Party, the leader of it, who's deeply studied both the positive, the overwhelmingly positive, as well as the negative experience of those revolutions and brought forward a re-envisioned revolution in communism that could emancipate humanity and a strategy for getting there. And I encourage people to take a look at the table back there tonight. So we can't give Obama a chance. We can't give him time. Giving Obama time is a death sentence for people in Afghanistan and Pakistan. We need to resist. We've got different ideological viewpoints and political ideas here tonight. That's good. That's as it should be. And we have to join together to resist. And I want to go back to the world and end with what the World Can't Wait said several years ago, because it still rings true. Silence and paralysis are not acceptable. That which you will not resist and mobilize to stop, you will learn or be forced to accept. We must aim to create a political situation where the Bush regime's program, and remember, this program is not over with. It's still shaping the terms of things. And the whole direction he's been taking this world is reversed. And I just have to say, if your allegiance is more to this particular country or to the Democratic Party, then don't call yourself an anti-war leader. That's not what you are. Our allegiance has to be to what's right and what's in the interests of humanity and stopping these crying injustices, no matter who's in office. History is full of examples where people, and this is from the World Can't Wait call, which I think is still timely, where people had right on their side and fought against tremendous odds and were victorious, and full of examples who are passively hoping to wait it out only to be swallowed by a horror beyond what they ever imagined. And I just want to say here that this financial crisis, these ongoing wars, none of this is over because Barack Obama happens to be moving into 1600 Pennsylvania. In many ways, it may be just beginning. The future's unwritten. Which one we get is up to us. And there's much people can do right now to hasten revolution and to stop these unjust wars and torture. Thank you very much.
Social forces. We have imperialism coming in from the outside, either militarily or economically, and destroying or disrupting, dislocating these traditional societies. We have a response of Islamic fundamentalism, which is not a solution for the peoples of this region either. And the more you support one, the more you reinforce the other one. These things have a reinforcing dynamic to each other, and you can see that. What's happened since 2001 in Iraq, in Afghanistan, in Pakistan, fueled reactionary Islamic fundamentalism. And the best thing that we can do here, which our solution, I think, is revolution, is if there was a revolution in this country, and there was the total transformation of the economy of this country, not simply to meet the needs of people here, but to be a base for revolutions around the world, really liberating, transformative revolution. I think this could change the whole picture globally. I mean, just imagine the impact of that. And somebody's asking
and I think, I encourage people to check out and get with the revolution. Find out about it. Obviously, when you say this, it raises big questions. Could it happen? Didn't these things, what's the experience of these things in the past? Questions here was, why did they have Obama run? Well, look, they realize they're in deep trouble, and this is a very fraught situation for them. I'm not saying we're on the eve of a revolutionary crisis. I can't make that prediction, but this is far from impossible, and I think let's get to the fundamentals of why this keeps happening and what the real roots of these things are, and not just fight the phenomenon, even, yes, as we fight the phenomenon.
I'm not a communist. I'm the antithesis of a communist, I guess. I'm a capitalist American who believes in the Constitution of the United States of America, and I believe in the rule of law, and I believe in the great potential of this country, recognizing that this was a country that was born of revolution. So I'm not anti-revolution per se. I'm just thinking that maybe we actually solved this problem once, and rather than trying to rip up the entire basis and foundation of this country and give up on it and walk away from it, my answer to the question is we need to become better Americans. You see, being a better American doesn't mean that you turn your back on humanity. Being a better American means that we actually took the time and effort to read the damn Constitution and understand what the founding principles and ideals of the people who created this country were. I'm always frustrated when people talk about Guantanamo and torture and this, that, and the other thing. And yeah, they have this visceral gut sickness about it. But when you ask them, define the law. I mean, FISA. We've criticized Barack Obama and others for, their support of FISA, warrantless wiretapping. But if I say, well, that's a violation of the Fourth Amendment, protection against illegal search and seizure, people look at you blankly. Gentlemen, you see, the reason why these abuses are taking place is because 300 million Americans haven't a foggiest clue about what it means to be an American. And so we get disgusted. Yeah, if what defines America deviates from the Constitution and the ideals and the values and the rule of law, then that isn't defining America. That defines something else. But to say I am an American means that I have a working understanding and comprehension of the Constitution of the United States of America, and I will spend my every waking moment to ensure that this Constitution is adhered to by those whom we elect to higher office to represent us in government. And that's what we need to do. I'd like to give this a chance. I'd like to reverse some ridiculous Supreme Court opinions. For instance, the one that gave corporations the status of citizen. I think that's sort of one of the fundamental issues that we're dealing with here. But that doesn't mean we need a revolution. That just means we need to do our damn job as citizens. Let's start working at the grassroots level to get state legislatures to put laws into place so we can head towards an amendment that reverses or defines this ridiculous proposition that empowers irresponsible capitalism, that limits the freedom of speech of individuals while giving strength to corporate America. This isn't turning our back on America, ladies and gentlemen. This is embracing America. This is defending America. And if we do this, we're defending the ideals and values that say that human beings count, and therefore we become a better member of the global community. Because
it's a good argument. We like this argument. No, but really, first, let's start with what the question was. Their conscience and through their beliefs and find these wars intolerable and wrong, need to be coming together like we are tonight and arguing about and exposing them as we are tonight. And yes, arguing, having our debate on what is the cause, what is the solution, very important to have. And I get, a lot of people in this day and age, Dan Ellsberg, other people like this have spoken out against these wars from the standpoint that Scott's articulating of upholding the Constitution. And I think it's important for people like that, for people like me, to, again, join together to oppose war crimes, crimes against humanity, and so on and so forth. And I think people in here are probably aware of it, that, people who have been in official positions pay a price for getting out there and telling the truth. And bringing the truth that they know, in many ways, in Scott's case, the weapons of mass destruction issue, better than anyone, really, and perform a great service by bringing that forward. But on the Constitution question, because I do think this is a very fundamental question, we have given it a chance. It's had 200 years. And one of the things the Constitution does is guarantee the rights of property, ownership of property, ownership of the means of production.